If you are a frequent listener to the podcast, you know that we have been sponsored by Fuji Sports for quite some time now. Whether you're looking for apparel, equipment, bags, or accessories, Fuji Sports has got it covered. Go to fujisports.com to see the latest selection of everything you need for your Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, or MMA journey. That's fujisports.com. Let me take a minute to tell you about RŌL TV. If you're looking to take your Jiu-Jitsu to the next level and supplement your BJJ education, then RŌL TV has you covered. RŌLAcademy.tv has over 1,500 videos covering individual techniques, positions, and concepts, including seminars and workshops with top-level competitors and instructors like Chris Wojcik, Robert Drysdale, Aaron Hurley, Emily Kwok, and more. Whether you are a beginner or more advanced student, RŌL TV is the online platform that can take your jiu-jitsu to the next level. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you listen. This helps us bring you the great guests and amazing content that you've come to expect. In this engaging conversation, Thomas's guest shares his journey of self-discovery, the influence of mentors, and the importance of embracing discomfort in personal growth. He discusses the complexities of cultural expectations, the art of jiu-jitsu, and the significance of teaching and learning dynamics. Here's the RŌL Radio with a black belt in Tae Kwon Do, Hapkido, and BJJ, an entrepreneur and the co-author of Lessons from the Mat, Benjamin Chen.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we're live. Benjamin Chen on the show. How are you, sir? How is your evening going so far?
It's going really well. You know, I live in San Diego, so it's an incredibly beautiful weather.
Yeah, I'm jealous because I'm in Midwest and we got first snow today. Literally, I woke up to a little dust on the backyard, and so I am jealous of the California, especially San Diego weather. Yeah.
Well, you have the change of seasons, and you've got the hardiness of the neighborly, support from each other, from all your people around you.
Well, that's a very positive spin on the Chicago weather. I appreciate your positivity here, but I will be honest with you. I would appreciate to wake up to 50 or 60 or 70 degrees versus 30. But such is life, right? Life is too short to complain, and it is what it is. And speaking of life, you have done a lot in your life. And I got to ask you right off the bat, as I was getting ready for this, I was reading about you and thinking about how this conversation might be going. Do you feel like your life was busy or is busy? I feel like there was a lot going on, has been going on. You've been involved in corporate life, leadership, and a lot of companies. And I don't mean like family-owned small things. You've been involved in the large things, in addition to your very rich martial arts tenure.
I think, Thomas, I've been very lucky, and I would start with that. And I've been very lucky in the sense that I've been able to meet a lot of good people, mentors that have helped me grow and pushed me along the way. I think one of the most pivotal times that isn't in the book, is I'm in college and I went to University of Southern California, and I was a medical, major, right? I was going to be the Asian family boy doctor and follow the path. And I wasn't happy doing that. And a friend of mine who was a much older gentleman, I had a side kind of gig going on where I was selling computers. And there was a computer company at that time called Zenith. And they were one of the first companies to have what we call a notebook. So it was kind of like one of the first true folding computers versus the lunchbox that you'd roll around. And, you'd come to my dorm room and you could get your term paper printed. I had a couple of them laid out, and I was gray marketing these notebooks I'd be selling to people. And he was one of the guys that sold to it. His name was Casey Cohen. He was an old legal investigator guy. And, he said, Ben, you're really good at this. And he said, you should consider, doing something in this technology business thing. And I remember thinking to myself, I really love this. I really love teaching people things and explaining new technology to them and making something, happen in their lives and seeing the real change. Like I showed them how to use, at that time, Word Perfect versus Microsoft Word was the prominent leader in word processing. And I showed him how to use that. And it changed his whole life. Because he was sitting there typing on a typewriter. And here all of a sudden a word processor was available. And I thought to myself, this is like, it felt so good. It felt really just like meaningful. And so I did the unthinkable. I went home and I told my parents, I'm going to change my major to business. And my
What was their
parents,
response?
they were ballistically mad.
Yeah.
It was like, we're going to disown you. I mean, it was really bad. And I just said, look, this is something that I feel passionate about. It's something I don't feel like I'm going to be the virtuoso of being a surgeon. That's just not, it's just not in me. It was the same when I was, I played clarinet for 12 years and I was supposed to, I could have been a music major in school too. And I was technically proficient. I could learn, I could remember, I could execute, but it wasn't who I was. And so it was the same. It was like, that's not who I am. I'm not a surgeon.
Was that decision difficult for you? I mean, I would imagine coming from a traditional family like this, where a path is almost carved out for you in a sense.
It was
And
incredibly difficult.
were you
And
afraid of disappointing your parents?
absolutely. Absolutely. But I don't know how to express it, Tom. Even at such a young age in my, call it just past 18 kind of notion, the fact that I would want to be willing to rebel, so to speak, it was risky. It was really risky.
Have you ever thought of what would happen if this didn't work? If your plan backfired in some sense? I mean, I would imagine at the age of 18, 19, even 25, I mean, with all the respect to all young people, but we don't have much experience. We even what we feel that we want to do, it really can, curveballs can come in all kinds of directions, right?
It could, but I think that inside everybody's DNA is already the life path exists. It's a question of whether or not you want to recognize it. So I'll go back even further, right? When I was in junior high, there's a program called Junior Achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for young kids to kind of get an idea of what business is like. And I remember being so mesmerized being in that program. And I made first aid kits with a team and we sold them. And I remember finding out that there were hospital supply companies that sold bandages in volume versus me going to the local, at that time, version of CVS and buying the band-aids and unpacking them and putting them in my little first aid kit. And I was like mesmerized. I was like, wow, there's wholesalers for band-aids, and it was incredible, like super fun. And so I'd always had these tiny little businesses when I was just young, whether it was that or selling light bulbs door to door or magazine subscriptions or, whatever it was. I loved the process. I loved the challenge. right? I've got to think of this thing I have in my hand now, and I got to present that to somebody and make sure it fits their need, and so that was always there. The rumblings of that were always there. And then there was this path. You will be a doctor, and at some point they just collided.
Mhm.
And it was really kind of like almost a moment of crisis, where I was like, yeah, I just can't do this. And things were getting tougher too. Let's not forget, like, execution is execution, but those courses aren't simple.
Yeah.
You and they're designed to weed you out.
What is that conversation with your parents like?
It's almost the conversation that wasn't had, really. I think Oriental parents, at least, my parents are Chinese essentially from background. Um, it's not one where it's a very, fluffy, lovey-dovey, hug you, oh, I love you, son, kind of thing. You rarely ever hear that word ever. It's more of, these kind of looks, occasional kind of angriness, and then it's just like it's nonverbal after that. It's just like, now I'm going to make a decision whether I'm disowning you or not.
Do you feel like situations like this made you more resilient later in life?
I mean, I would like to say that, but I'm not sure it was resiliency, more kind of this. There's an aspect in me that wants to seek the truth for whatever it is, including myself. So I used to kind of think about, what is the truth of my life? What is that? And that really has broad implications.
Mhm.
But I used to kind of drive around this kernel. Is this really who I am? Is this the truth of this situation that's in front of me? What is the truth here? And I just couldn't. You get older and you start realizing, man, I'm going to go down this path, and the path to be a surgeon is like a long, arduous path. And I was always good about understanding that there was a path. Like, I'm going to go commit now some set of hours, some set of days, some repetitive set of things to go achieve this result. And in my mind, I can see that target far away. And I know that I'm on this path and I can continue to,
Mhm.
to walk towards it.
Mhm.
So that it's some innate part of me that is comfortable enough to know that the path exists, irrespective of the ardor in between, to go get it. So there was a part of me that already recognized, to be the surgeon, I felt like I could, you know, get through it to get there. But I also could feel the journey not being, like you realize the stakes are bigger now.
Mhm.
It was the same kind of decision had made for my music. I played clarinet for 12 years. I got to college and my instructor had got me into the woodwind section, the orchestra at USC. And I'm with the head guy, right? And it's not so easy to just get there to that place. I'm auditioning. He's saying, you know what? Your tone's pretty good. I need you now to practice 4 to 5 hours a day. And he was serious. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm a biomedical engineering student and I'm going to practice for it. No, that's not going to happen. And I know that I'm not a virtuoso. Like, I had seen other kids from our school that had joined Dave Brubeck's jazz band. Like, they were like virtuosos. They were born to play the sax. They were, I understood what that meant, what that felt like. I was not that. I was highly proficient. I could be taught a skill, replicate the skill.
What's fascinating about what you're saying about even just these two examples is that ability to recognize that you are or you are not something. I feel like a lot of people struggle with that, especially today. Young people, perhaps with certain level of entitlement or wanting to do something. But what you
Mm.
are describing is this path was designed for me by my parents in this case, or I am part of this organization, this music organization, but I know that this is not going to happen and I need to let go of this. And it's fascinating to listen to you because I think there's two things that immediately strike me. One, the ability of saying, I might be good, but I'm not good enough. And I think a lot of people struggle with that part. Even in Jiu-Jitsu, we see this all the time.
Mm.
Like just unrealistic expectations. Like this honesty that you speak about, it is very refreshing to listen to. But also, in addition to all of this, the ability to create a plan which will take you where you need to go. And you talk about that, like in a long term, I see this. This is where I'm going to go. There are going to be milestones along the way. The path might change. There might be obstacles and things, but I trust the process. And I think a lot of people these days do not trust the process. They question the process. They find loopholes. And I think this is why a lot of people give up very, very quickly.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with giving up quickly, right? I think that's actually an important thing to recognize early on in the cycle of a particular thing. However, I think that it's so easy to be lost
Mhm.
in the expectations of others.
Yeah.
Especially in today's, instant gratification, social
Yeah.
media world. You're only presented with, all these interesting, looks and feels of, what the perfect vision of someone is. Um, I think that it's difficult. The truth telling process is difficult to get to for, I think, even for me still at this age, but I look at it as it's the only way. Like when I look at something or think about something, there aren't multiple ways of a thing. There's only one true way. There's only one truth. That's why it's a truth that exists for me.
Does
And
this truth vary between different individuals looking at the same objective?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think what's interesting to me especially about martial arts and especially about jiu-jitsu when I teach today, a technique that I know, and now I have to express that to a group of people and try to have them learn that technique. You know what? The technique is going to be slightly different in its implementation and execution for each combination of the people that are doing it together, big and small, tall and short.
Mhm.
That's the reality. But we oftentimes, we say, well, you know what? You know, this, arm lock is supposed to work like this. And you just do steps 1 through 5 and voila,
Mhm.
you get the magical arm lock. It's interesting. I think it's important logistically to understand, the mechanics of a thing. But the truth is so much deeper than that.
It's fascinating to listen to you speak about jiu-jitsu in that way because I do I do think, and we see this all the time everywhere, is that there's a lot of individuals look at jiu-jitsu as this cookie cutter, almost recipe-like approach. And what you are describing is, I was actually sharing this with one of my students just a couple of days ago, and I made this analogy is if we put 100 black belts in a room and asked them to teach exactly same thing, I'm pretty confident we would receive 100 different versions.
Oh, yes.
There would be not one interpretation. There would be overlapping things. There would be common denominators, if you will. But we probably will receive 100 different interpretations. And this is what's fascinating to me, at least, about jiu-jitsu. It is almost every time I see a new instructor or somebody demonstrating, it is this ability or willingness, I should say, to be open-minded enough to be a student again, because you might have seen this, but you haven't seen it from that person. And their perspective is different.
Absolutely. I think, initially when the Gracies taught, right, in Brazil, they were private lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no concept that jiu-jitsu would be taught in a group environment. And part of the rationale, in my understanding is that, it's hard to customize the education process for something like a physical art, to a group of people that actually it would slightly vary for each person if you had the opportunity to spend the time to craft and say, well, your legs are a little bit longer. You have an advantage to do this versus that, right? And you should focus on this strength of yours. And I think that, it's very challenging in the communications process to be able to effectively communicate a simple sentence to a group of 100 people and have them all understand that, because everybody processes information differently and learns differently, and everybody that's teaching expresses differently. So it creates a whole challenge, of what you really truly can communicate in a class. And, and it's interesting because Scott and I and a group of us, we talk about, like even the hidden invisible jiu-jitsu concepts that Hickson kind of, when you're with him long enough, you kind of get this understanding of that. Is that even teachable to a white belt, to someone that's just beginning their journey? Or can they even appreciate what you're teaching them? Like you're showing them something and it's just like, I think that's probably one of the greatest difficulties of learning jiu-jitsu, as well as the most interesting part of it, is that there is not a universal golden rule. It doesn't work like that. And for anyone that thinks they're going to watch a YouTube video and all of a sudden know all the dynamics of that position or that execution, they are absolutely wrong about that.
Yet we have millions of people thinking that.
Yeah,
right?
and I think this gets back to the notion of the truth.
Right.
There's a lot of noise, right? There's all this noise out there, and you have to kind of now go back in and try to find yourself and then decide, okay, this is who I am. This is physically what I'm good at. These are my actual attributes. Now, how do I leverage that in the most efficient manner to anything I'm doing?
But still, let me pick that apart a little. Let's unpack this a little bit, because you have, let's just say, Bobby Joe is stamping on the mat for very first time, first week, first month. Well, let's go deeper. First year.
Yeah.
How would they have a capability of making a rationale like this? Excuse me. How would they have the ability to say, I see all this chaos, I hear it, I'm surrounded by it, but how do I filter this out? I mean, isn't this what instructors are for, to provide that path to, like, how is a student who's just starting supposed to do that?
It's a difficult question to answer. I think it's different for many types of people, but there's one part of me that would argue with you that, let's say you're 20-year-old, 20-something-year-old, individual, you're from Camp Pendleton, you're, you've got some ideas about what combat is or self-defense, and so you're executing that way. And if I were to argue with you about what martial arts truly is, and I would say, it's about efficiency
Mhm.
for doing a particular set of things. And in this case, combat, self-defense, hurting someone else, whatever it ends up being, efficiency is the key. And so the human body can only move in certain ways. You only have so much energy. You could argue a lot of things if you really want to get down to what does efficiency mean. But the noise, unfortunately, is the fact that you are 20. You can move very quickly. You're flexible, you're strong. You can, so you can compensate for inefficiency, right? And most people compensate for inefficiency, not only in jiu-jitsu, but in their careers and for their lives, their marriages, etc. And that only works for so long. Eventually, and so what I look at is this is a long answer to your question. I kind of look at it as what I really need you to do in the first part of the engagement is I need you to settle, to slow. And I need to just really try to, like, when I'm trying to help somebody, I'm super hyper aware of their breathing, of their eye movements, of the intensity of their body. I'm trying to say, look, I need you to clear yourself. I need you to relax. And in order for that to happen, you got to be safe, because you get all this madness. Oh my God, I'm going to be learning stuff from other people. I heard this is a dangerous sport and all this kind of, you've got your ego going on. You got all this stuff going on. And so my job is to make it safe for you. I have to that's my first priority, is I have to make the environment safe. Physically, mentally, ego, your heart, I have to make it safe for you. If I can do that, then a lot of this other noise, these other things you grasp onto, you're going to feel not as needed to do that. So I look at it, my approach is to try to be, it's almost like I'm trying to trick you to think that, it's okay. It's okay not to know. We're going to relax now. If I can get you to this kind of place, it'll be so much easier when I express a simple concept to you.
I feel like that approach requires a lot of patience, which I also think not a lot of people have these days. So
Well,
I'm
you
curious
get that when
to
you get
ask.
older.
Well, so this is the fascinating part. One of the first things that came to my mind as you were speaking right now is a simple thought: is this fundamentally why we slow things down as we progress deeper into jiu-jitsu? I mean, like, imagine seeing as somebody who just started a month ago, even a year ago, like the amount of intensity it is, the amount of stress that their mind and body goes through. It's almost mind-blowing. And then at
Yes,
some point, this slowly, I mean, very slowly slows down within the first 3 years, but it's still bouncing off the walls, right? It's perhaps more targeted bouncing, we would say. And then somewhere 5, 6, 8, maybe 10 years later, things slow down. And then at some point of this path, perhaps that person achieves a level of efficiency of a black belt. And then they are the ones speaking to the crowd saying exactly the same thing as their instructor was telling them 10 years ago. It is almost like this vicious circle that we have to go through this experience of struggle, failure, stress, anxiety, even to experience it in order for us to calm down. But again, it takes an enormous amount of time, doesn't it?
I think that's a perspective. I think, the founder, or the CEO of NVIDIA, for instance, right? Jensen. It's interesting. I think it was maybe the Stanford class he was addressing or something like that. And he was basically saying, I wish you all to have difficulty in your life, because without difficulty, you're never really going to understand, what the path really means. And yes, there's going to be struggle. And without the context of that struggle in the journey, and yes, the journey is going to be long. The reality is you need compounding interest. You need compounding interest, whether it's to make money, whether it's to build a skill, whether it's to build a relationship. You need compounding interest. Your investment has to be consistent over a long period of time. And if you think you're going to be one of these, 24-hour Instagram, influencer billionaire people, unfortunately, that's not the way the world really works. It doesn't work like that. To be good at anything.
Well, Ben, then let me ask you, in a very simple way, let me ask you this. You know this. I know this. I actually believe that most people actually know that simplicity of this.
Yes.
And yet not many do it. I mean, even if we look at the tenure of the average person sticking out with developing an efficient skill, let's just say jiu-jitsu, but it could be swimming. It doesn't matter. It could be chess. It doesn't matter. As a skill, it takes enormous amount of time, a lot of effort. Consistency is the key. We all know that. We all know that.
But is 10 years really enormous?
Well, it's all about perspective.
Yeah.
Right? For 20-year-old, 10 years is half of their life. Now,
it seems that.
For, somebody your or my age, that 10 years is nothing. I mean, it just flies by,
Right.
But it's all perspective, isn't it?
So yes, it's more difficult when you're younger. But this gets to my feeling of the importance of the truth. As a person, what are you really good at? What is your true capability? It's the same question I ask when I interview somebody, right? To join the team. I only have one real question, because all the resumes look the same. It's really about, what are you really good at? And if I talk to your peers and your friends, when they're in trouble and they're calling people for some help, what do they call you for? And I think the goal as a parent, the goal as a leader, the goal as a mentor is to help people understand that as quickly as possible. Right? My job as a parent is not to helicopter my child onto some weird path. My job is to help that individual find out who they are as quickly as possible, in such a way that they don't perish. That's like the way I think about it. And it's the same way when the person's on the mat. My job is to help you understand what you are really good at. How you learn, how you understand how things work. And then once you yourself understand that, then I'm going to feed you that way. And I'm going to reinforce that to help make your path more efficient.
Well, in that case, then let me ask you this: if this is so simple, how come not all instructors do it that way? I mean, you're describing this is a simplicity of life, like,
It's
and we can apply this all
antithetical.
across everywhere.
Yeah, it's antithetical, unfortunately, to the concept of making money.
Yeah.
If you think about, at least that's my perception. And I have visited a number of gyms throughout the world, but the way I see it is that, people come to train for different reasons.
Yes.
But oftentimes, they're coming to get the new shiny toy, right, as quickly as possible. And the problem with that is that often doesn't mean they get more clarity in their own truth when they're being just offered the toy. So and it takes an incredible amount of patience, additional work as a mentor, as a leader, as a teacher to do that. And I would say, unfortunately, there is no great teaching school that many go to for martial arts. Unfortunately, it is oftentimes gyms have been established, and part of it is there just wasn't enough teachers, and you have people that had fought and won medals and rightly so, they're a true fighter champion. Why not have that person teach? And I'm not saying it doesn't work for everybody. I'm just saying that in my world and when I think about it, that's what I seek to do.
Is that how it was when you were starting martial arts? I mean, you have quite extensive
Mm,
exposure over your lifetime, right? From Tae Kwon Do to
yes.
Hapkido and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So diversity of the exposure is there. Is that how it was taught to you? The deeper understanding what you needed at that point of time?
Boy, that's also a really hard question. I think my early days, my first engagement with martial arts and Taekwondo when I started in college. Master, Grandmaster Jun Chong. Um, what I loved about it was that he had the most incredibly biggest smile. It was amazing, his smile. It was just like he was a light bulb. He was so happy. And he was so gentle and fierce. So he would spar with you. And at that time, when I started, there were no helmets. And then a couple of years later, we all had to wear helmets because the insurance laws changed. And and he would just, you get tapped, and he would just, he would keep hitting you in certain places until you finally decided you're going to block that place and your ribs would stop hurting, right? But he was so good at that. But it was this real, it's hard to explain. I think great instructors have this kind of magic, this intensity, this internal soulfulness about who they are as a human being. And that kind of just radiates. And and it and I would say that, it was very attentive. Like, if I had a certain difficulty doing something, the conversation of the instruction would change when he dealt with me to accommodate that. Now, let's look at it a different way. I've always been very focused on getting instruction too. I'd always take all the group classes and I'd always maximize private instruction simultaneous. Because I felt that, I needed to get more attention to understand and learn. So I've always been this incredible, like, I want to learn and I want to get as much But
Was that because you were seeking more information, or is that because the information you were getting is not detailed enough?
it's always seeking more. I'll show you, like, the joy I get is learning something, and then, you're on the mat with Hickson, and the group of us is sitting around and watching him just execute this arm bars or whatever the technique is. And then you're like, oh. And you realize, I don't know if everybody really understands this, but you quickly realize that an art is incredibly deep. It's a lifetime of learning. Just like an artist paints a painting, there is always more to learn. You never finish that. The moment you think that you've perfected something, that's the moment that, you kind of have checked out.
Is that how you were thinking at the very beginning when you stepped on a jiu-jitsu mat particularly? Did you have that awareness of this is going to be a lifetime process?
Yeah.
There's nothing quick about this.
I started jiu-jitsu when I was 47.
Yeah.
Right. And I already had my fair share of, some injuries and bruises and scars along the path of martial arts training. And you should know that, stand up, striking, moving around, weaving, bobbing, I'm like, I can throw a punch, do a couple kicks here and there. I always was afraid of jiu-jitsu. Like,
why?
Inside my heart, it's like scary. Like, I weigh 135 pounds. I'm like 5'6", 5'7". I'm, and I'm older, and I just know, oh, that's that thing that those wrestler guys do. That's the judo kind of on the ground shit that, that's what the real badasses are doing, right?
Was that your perception? Was that your perception? That's what the badasses do?
Yeah, I mean that. I've got some cool punches, and I can do some things, but in the back of my head, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm afraid of that. And I used to drive by this Gracie Humaita gym every day to my office, and I'm like 47, and I'm starting to think about, fuck, I'm like maybe putting on a little bit more weight, and I'm like, and Hapkido's not really, I'm learning great stuff in Hapkido, and I'm like, yeah, I got to go do this thing. I'm afraid of it. And so when I started, I knew it was going to be rough, but it was fucking rough. I mean, I kid you not. I was, being crushed as a white belt over and over and over again. It's humbling, but it's also very demoralizing. And you're bruised. And I remember my back got thrown out twice. Like you can't even move, and you're like, why am I doing this? Or at least that's what my wife would say. But I knew.
Why were you doing it?
Because I loved it. Because
so I share the same thoughts here, same feelings, but for somebody who's listening to this conversation, they're gonna say, these two knuckleheads are nuts. I mean, like, they're talking about this thing. They love this thing. They're gonna do this all day long. They want to convince everybody in the world that this is the coolest thing in the world. But yet they come back home with aches, bruises, their back is off, and all the other stuff, all this injury. Like, is this even like, they are nuts? I mean, many people think that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the process of learning this skill about, turning on more lamps in the dark room and becoming less and less fearful, and also finding out again more about my own truth. That There's nothing that can replace that. And so I would argue with you that by going through this journey, it makes everything in my life better. By, my ability to lead others, my ability to deal with difficult scenarios at home, everything becomes easier, not because I'm going through the difficulty, it's because I'm forcing myself to come closer to my truth. And I think if you're willing to continue to make yourself better and better, then other things miraculously become better. You have to take care of yourself. And I believe that for people like me, Jiu-Jitsu is clearly a way to do that. I can't express to you how, I'd already kind of had this mentality that, I could survive and fight and do these things. But now, today at 60, still being able to go onto the mat and roll with these, bigger, taller, younger blue belt guys that are still trying to prove something and still either not be submitted or defeat them, and not have a whole lot of stuff attached to it, just going through the flow of it. That truth is so empowering in my life. It brings me such an additional comfort of knowing that, yeah, I can look at something that looks challenging for the outside, but I know that my consistency, my persistence, my willingness to learn can get me down this road. And once you have that, no one can take that away from you. And it's so
That's
powerful.
I can't agree with you more. One of the things that you mentioned in your book, Lessons from the Mat, is, I believe it was point number 10 or the principle number 10. It was embrace the discomfort.
Mm.
And you briefly described this here as we continue this conversation, as not only the consistency, but the continuous discomfort. And I don't even mean it in a physical way, but it sounds to me like the discomfort oftentimes comes from that easy choice that we don't have to do this. Putting ourselves in this uncomfortable feeling of continuously doing something that we are not good at and continuously chasing this skill.
So I'll give you two thoughts on that. One, about the notion of embracing discomfort. Scott and I, when we were putting this together, we had a long discussion about this chapter. And I felt really strongly about this, but how it was positioned, we kind of, Scott was like, Ben, what's the, people are dealing with difficult situations all the time. Problems are being thrown at them. They get discomfort. So how is it, doing discomfort, adding more discomfort, helping me? And what I really, the kernel of this, it's about the intentionality, the mental knowing, right? For instance, doing a cold plunge or a cold shower, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's enough research out there. There's enough for me to know that the caveman did not have hot running water all the time. And that cold water, is useful. Yeah, it's useful. It makes my body stronger. It's free. It cost me nothing. So here I have an opportunity to make myself better. It's free. And I only have to mentally endure this for 3 minutes. So if you, like for me, right, if I wake up in the morning and after my meditation, I go and do my cold swim or get in the cold plunge or do my cold shower, which I usually do after either of those. If I intentionally do that mentally, it's like building a muscle, right? You're like, yeah, okay. I know it's good for me. There's no question that it's not, that's, barring some other medical problem I might have. So I'm adding value. I'm adding compound interest to my mind in addition to my body. Compound
But that's,
interest requires that consistency.
I was about to say, but that's the consistency.
Yeah. And once you start, now I'll tell you, I've told this to hundreds of people. And out of hundreds of people, I've occasionally had, 2 or 3 people raise their hand and said, "Oh, I started doing this." It's hard because you have to mentally kind of cross like this. There's like this barrier, this mental barrier. Oh, but no, Ben, I can't do that. I like my warm showers or whatever. Yeah, I love that. I'm like, yeah, I understand.
But this is how it's with most of our life. I mean, we resist the difficult things, and perhaps this might be because our brain is designed to protect us. But isn't this like the challenge 101 for most people? I want to find a new job. Then you need to start with your resume. Well, I don't know if I have time for that. Okay. You want to lose weight. Then maybe go for a 15-minute walk every morning. Oh, well, I rather sleep in. I mean, I can give endless examples of people finding. I mean, you want to continue jiu-jitsu, show up, 3 times a week and let's work on things. Oh, but I mean, endless amount of reasonings why we can't do hard things.
Yes, this is true. And it is unfortunately, the popular reality of many people's lives. I, I would just say this to you, it is like, what Grandmaster Kang said to me about meditation. Do you have 2 minutes a day? And what was I going to say? No, I don't have 2 minutes a day. I mean, he's genius when he said that. It's really that simple. Life is not that complicated, really. If you focus on the important things, and I would argue that my mental state of being, my physical health are perhaps some of the most important things, then my ability to express myself comfortably with my family, with my students, with other people I interact with. This is the value. And it's simple, actually. The truth is simple. It's oftentimes this weird circuitous route of all these weird expectations that are just driving all of this stuff over here. That's unfortunately, it limits people.
Why do you think there is? Why do you think we overcomplicate things so much when the simple truth is right in front of us? Why do we refuse the simplicity?
The truth is scary. I mean, I'll tell you, the scariest things that could happen for me, and I think for maybe many other people, is just sitting in a place by yourself, silent. That's really fucking scary. You know,
And hard.
yeah, because, you know, you're not, you know, you don't have anything to interrupt you from the truth. And you start realizing, you know what? I'm not spending enough time with my kids, or I'm not really addressing my weight issue, or I'm not really addressing, and it's the important things are there all the time. You just make it easy for yourself to ignore that because it's scary. So, oh, I'm not going to deal with that right now, or I got more time, you know. And it's really, really scary. And it's hard. People don't want to be uncomfortable. But unfortunately, you know what? The caveman, he was uncomfortable. And that's what I see. You know, I think there's an earnestness about people in the Midwest. You know, things are more challenging, more difficult. And I find that when I deal with someone from the Midwest, there's more of a truth to that human than other places. Because, you know, they have that physical reality of, you know what, there are seasons. And sometimes those seasons are dangerous. And we have to, you know, I have to know about what the practical reality of life is here now. You get to other places where there's no reality of that kind of truth. And people are soft. They're not close to their center.
Are you saying that you're moving to Midwest?
I'm saying that I greatly appreciate the people that I've met from the Midwest. And I'm also saying that that's not the only way, right, to get to your center. But I'm recognizing that people that come from more difficult environments, their concept, their center, their hardiness is better.
Do you think this
can-
is why, after a decade or two of training Jiu-Jitsu, or any martial arts for that matter, we find this internal peace? We seek the efficiency. We slow things down. We talked about that. But we also look for simplicity. At least I feel like a lot of well-established individuals from martial arts that I've talked to on the show, many of them have this common denominator of simplicity, of digging deeper than just the surface of what many people see. And the shiny object is not so shiny. Like, that's not the priority anymore.
Yes. Well, the truth is always very singular, and it's always very simple, actually. It's never been complicated. I mean, if you look at Steve Jobs and Apple, you know, once they focused on what they were really good at, and instead of having 100 different products, the core 3 or 4 products that mattered. You know, I was once sitting next to the CTO for Sony on an airplane ride. It was a long ride. We were flying across the country. And I was blown away by literally the hundreds and hundreds of different product SKUs that they had. Compared to Apple, with just a few SKUs, a few choices for computers, right? You know, taking somebody like Steve Jobs, because you have to imagine that this is his expression, his ability to find the truth, the clarity, versus the anxiety of the other. Trying to, oh, did I have one for this version and one for that one and one for this one? And I look at it like martial arts, and it's very simpler. You know, to learn how to defend yourself, to learn how to engage with another human being in a fight, or, you know, it's actually pretty simple. It is actually really simple. It's just easy to get lost. It's easy to overreach. It's easy to get greedy. It's easy to, as Hickson, would never do, give up his base for a submission. You just don't need to do that. And what's interesting about it is as old as I am, I'm so greatly appreciative of that. Because what got me down that path, the Hickson path, so to speak, it's because I'm just an older, frail, smaller, weaker person. So right around being a purple belt, I'm kind of going from the Donahue side to the, this, and I'm starting to say, gosh, Henry's stuff is starting to work for me. And I'm starting to realize, what? I don't need to move around so much. What I really need to figure out is, oh yeah, this frame thing, this not, these very simple things. Oh yeah, breathing. Oh yeah, that's important. Like very simple things. But selfishly, they're working for me. And people are like, man, you're strong for your age. I'm like, I didn't get any stronger. My bones aren't getting any weaker though. It's just, you start it. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just doing what is working. That's all. That's it. It's just like this stuff works. This type of thinking works. And then you start realizing at some point, like a big giant aha happens. And you're like, oh, I kind of get it now. And that happened to me too in my Tae Kwon Do and Hapkido training. I get training with my Hapkido master and Grandmaster Kang's, I'm punching the pads and doing the kicking, and he's like, these punches bad. I'm like, what are you talking about? Black belt Taekwondo. I've done full contact sparring. I've done over 5,000 rounds in that. It's like, I know how to punch. I said, no, you do not. And he takes off his uniform and he puts my hand on his belly and his hip, and he says, this is how you throw a punch. And I could feel this kind of whip happening. And I quickly realized all these years, there was no whip. I was just forcing my punch through. But, and I realized like that it's that way for everything. And so even the magical thing about what I see in the invisible jiu-jitsu, it is like, oh yeah, of course. Of course, I would think about applying my body weight, my kettlebell. I'm going to use my kettlebell to do the submission, not my tiny little arm muscles. And once you start thinking about that for everything, you're like, your mind explodes, because then you're like, oh, that's how that move actually is supposed to work. And you realize that. And
Well,
that's how
Ben,
life.
if this is so simple, how come we all don't do it? I mean, we are talking about jiu-jitsu being so popular these days. I mean, reaching millions every single day, millions, billions around the globe. I mean, it's one of the fastest growing sports, period.
Yes.
And what you are describing is actually minority. This is not a common thought in jiu-jitsu.
No, it's not. I would tell you that I think there are a couple issues that are there. And I've seen this with some schools and instructors I know, and I've done a number of seminars in different locations. And I think one issue is, for the guy that's the sports champion, ADCC, IBJ, whatever, they're usually a young, tough, puhada, like guy that's going to go there and you're taught, you need to just ground and pound and just, and that's, but you're not, the notion of this essence, this quiet reality of why the thing is actually working, That's actually not so easy to teach. You can't teach that in a class so easily. And people get bored. They came there for this quick, Geranimals. 1, 2, 3, they came for that. And so the economics sometimes might not work, right? If you're known as, oh yeah, that's that spiritual instructor guru guy. I'm not getting the quick, guerrilla movement fighting pattern that I wanted. You might get turned off from that. And so I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think the instructors that we have in mass are fundamentally these kind of champions of this world, of the sporting contest world. And they've learned a thing a certain way and it's worked for them and they're there. But unfortunately, they're there because of their age, their strength, their flexibility, and that's going to work for them for some period of time. But the physics are wrong. And at some point, they won't be able to compensate for the missing of those. And I think the issue comes to is it's about true efficiency, right? You're in a life and death scenario. You want to know what the true efficiency is. And you want to maximize your movements against that because the reality is for me, right? Easily, pretty much everybody in the gym is going to have 50 pounds on me. Right. And when it gets to 220, or I got a 300-pound person, which occasionally happens, there's no escape of that. If you don't understand the physics of the situation, you're in a lot of trouble. And the reality on the street is going to be like that. Someone smaller, older than you is not going to be your attacker. That's unlikely.
Yeah, a lot of truth behind all of this. So, do you feel like we train for wrong reasons then?
No. Like, Scott and I talk about this a lot. People train for different things, right? They're still getting a lot of value. Obviously, it's growing like a weed.
Yeah. Well, that's
Right?
the interesting part behind all of this, right? Because if we are fundamentally saying that the things are not being taught the way how they should, yet it's growing at such a rapid rate, then either that statement is incorrect or people really appreciate what they are being taught. I mean, just
I
from
think people are not taking the art seriously for self-defense. I think if you're hyper focused on self-defense, you might consider looking at it with larger eyes. That's what I would say.
yeah,
because
yeah,
I look at and I think the people that have the most advantage in learning that aspect are the smaller, weaker people, especially females. They have
well, that's
no
what
choice.
Jiu-Jitsu. That's what this original idea was, right? The smaller person, a weaker person, having the skill of maintaining and essentially removing themselves from the compromised position, right?
Yeah, I brought one of the seminars we did recently. I bought a 50-pound kettlebell. I brought it to the gym. I just put it right on the mat. And a 50-pound kettlebell is pretty hard to pick up. You have to be totally focused. Your stance, your grip, everything has to be pretty good to comfortably pick up that 50-pound kettlebell. And I tell my students, all of you can be 50 pounds when you're dealing with the other person. And you start thinking about how heavy this weight is. Now you're on the ground with a 50-pound kettlebell. It's hard to move that kettlebell. Now imagine it's on your chest, this 50 pounds. And you start understanding, you know what? I could be 50 pounds. I could bring my 50-pound kettlebell to the engagement. Now, how do I do that? I mean, that's really the secret. How do you bring your 50-pound kettlebell to the submission? How do you do that? How do you bring it to the escape?
Yeah, that's the core of all of this. How do you find those hidden little
But
details
but
to
at some point,
maximize it,
it's
right?
no longer hidden anymore.
I agree 100%. I agree. Just by
It,
even
it,
having this conversation is just exposing some of those important things, right?
it's just a way. It's just a way of thinking and doing. You know, it was really interesting. You know, I would watch Hickson tackle a problem. You know, would say, "Oh, yeah, how do you get out of this thing?" Right? And you know, he would say, "Show me." You know, so my partner would get on top of him. He's like, you know, 4th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. And Chong would just like have him this thing, and I would watch his mind work. It was really fascinating. And I could feel it. I could see like it's like a computer. You know, he's just oh, this is not a move. You know, there's nothing here. You know, and then he just throws my partner right off the, you know. But it's just I realized when when I watched that happen, I understood. It's not about a series of memorized movements. Of course, many of the optimal movements will be very similar, but it's a way of approaching a problem.
Do you feel that jiu-jitsu is misunderstood in that way, that many people try to memorize things and without understanding it?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't want to get too, you know, I don't know, too mythical about it. You know, but it's so. I realized it's so deep. Like the wealth of knowledge is so much deeper. And so I kind of have realized that, so for somebody like Hickson, he understands this armbar thing or this problem thing. Like we're up here talking at the tip of the iceberg about it. And then all that stuff's work. But the reality is down here, there's an entire corpus of things about it that he might not ever be able to communicate to another human being because they're not ready enough to even receive it. He is so different of a human being in that way.
Do you feel like some of the information will be lost at some point of time?
Sure, that information will be lost, but there'll be new information that will be brought to bear. But I think it's a cycle. You know, I would argue with you that there's some old Japanese master long ago that knew these techniques also, and they tried to pass them down. And I think it's a very cyclical thing. I don't think that there are new moves that are being invented. I think it's just kind of, you know, the current expression of art that we have. It's not to say that everything will be lost. No. I mean, there's a number of really studious people like, you know, Chris Burns and others that are taking lots of, you know, notes and spending a lot more time than I'm able to do at the moment, right? But I now understand. At least I can tell you that I understand that there is so much more that is there that very few people will ever understand. I mean, one time, you know, Chung had Hickson in this armbar, probably 80% done. The arms almost fully extended. He's got, but it's tight, and Chan's like got all the latest techniques, right? We got it at the angle, pulling against the thigh, and all the weights on it. And I swear, I looked at him, and some tiny little ripple moved inside of his body. And then all of a sudden, Chan looked at me, and it's like he hit a wall. Nothing. And I'd heard that there are people sometimes that can interconnect small muscles in their body as a chain and do really radical things. Like it was literally something like that had happened. And I was just like, and Chan was like looking at me, and he had the thing, and I was just like, dude, there's nothing here. And I was like, there's no fucking way, And that's when I kind of realized, okay, this particular human being is uniquely different, and understands something to such an extreme level. It's kind of like the Bruce Lee, right? My first lesson with him is about breathing. But if you think about it, you know what? Breathing's pretty important.
Yeah. Underestimated too.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress, but it's deep in any
Well,
art.
it's fascinating to listen to you talk about all of this. One, I said this to Scott and I said this to Chris. I've had both of them on the show, but I feel like all of you guys are lucky cats, and having the opportunity and ability to sponge information like this firsthand. I mean, these are irreplaceable experiences that you guys have with Hickson, and it I think there's a lot of beauty behind it, not only knowledge and ability to pass it on, but just the experience itself. Having the opportunity to witness something like this is it's mind blowing. I mean, people would give up a lot to be in your shoes. Do you feel like you are a lucky cat?
Very, very.
Is this what brought to the forefront of your mind to write a book and put 12 principles on paper and share some of the thought that you have you have collected over the years?
I would say that it's definitely part of the whole. What I see from great instructors and great masters of their art is that there's something that is so large beneath the surface. When you get close to the artist, and as you participate in that yourself, you truly develop an appreciation for how much you don't know and how deep the art, as it's called an art, really is. And I think that the first principles, because I look at the book that Scott and I put together as perhaps truly the most important things. They're on the surface, right? I start with stillness as the first chapter. But, it's so easy to gloss over that. We talked about knowing who you are. We talked, about clearing. To me, that first chapter is actually an entire lifetime of work. And it's so interesting. Like when I start a role now, I'm just super relaxed. I'm so relaxed. And I'm so still. And it allows me to see more. And I think these principles are for all aspects of life. And so when I put them down, in my mind, what I presented is like the tip of the iceberg. But the concept of it is so encompassing.
So many lessons, so many things to learn, to adjust, to even talk about. Do you feel like most people go through this process, even just tip of the iceberg of understanding the truth about themselves, to have the ability or be even vulnerable to admitting to themselves that we have to work on things, we have to improve things, nothing is steady, everything is changing, and go even deeper as you describe it?
Hmm. You know, it's interesting. Before my father passed away, I was in Tokyo with a photographer. I think his name is Benjamin Lee, and he was from I think from Canada, and he relocated and married a lady in Tokyo, and you know he took a lot of award-winning photography there, and was part of that. And he's older now; he's in his 70s. And I had this weird, he had this weird Airbnb capability, this experience where you could meet with him and he would take some photos for you. And what was interesting to me about it was kind of like having, that book Tuesdays with Maury kind of feeling. Like here's a person that is an older person that has lived an interesting life as an artist, right? And expressed themselves and been wildly successful. And just trying to be close to that energy to understand what's important in life, what should you strive for. I mean, you kind of can't go to the grave with your stuff, right? That's just not a reality. So if you really think about what's important in your life, I think it's really about as quickly finding out who you are as a person. From that, expressing yourself in the way that you live and grow. And then through that process, from that vantage point, being able to help others and influence others. Because you can't lead other people and not know who you are. The bullshit meter will be on and they're going to see that.
Yeah.
And
That is all true.
I think that's all you can do.
There is a certain level of freedom that I hear from you. This throughout this entire conversation, I can't help myself to notice the level of not only confidence into what you believe, your perception, but also this free spirit of letting go, in a sense, the seeking that simplicity in life, and just letting things be. Is that how we should all be looking at things?
So I appreciate the way you characterize how that sounds. I would tell you in practicality, I don't feel that way. But it's how I strive. I tend to be more Buddhist in my thought process, to give you a context for it. I kind of believe change is inevitable, and that really the more comfortable with who you are means that it'll be that much more easier for you to adjust to the changes. And
Yeah,
so
I think
my
there's
focus has always been about finding the truth.
yeah.
And I believe stillness is critically important in that process.
Yeah, it definitely was big eye-opening to have this conversation with you. It is very intriguing for me to sit back and listen to you as you describe all of this. And I do believe that a lot of people actually could benefit from it and from a simplicity perspective. So I do appreciate you sharing a lot of that and sharing your vision on life and on jiu-jitsu, because I think that a lot of that simplicity translates one-to-one between each of them, from on the mat and off the mat. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. I would tell you there's this weaving of a business story, right, in the book. And I was given perhaps an impossible task. But I never had any doubts about the impossible task. Going to a foreign country, I don't really speak Chinese, right? I had to learn that along the path. And doing something I'd never done before, hiring a team of people in a foreign country, leading that team. There's so many different obstacles that happened along the way, but it didn't matter. It's kind of like I always have the same approach. I don't have multiple approaches. I just have what I know. And I just use that to keep going. Right? I know I'm climbing a hill. I just know I have to take multiple steps. I know I have to wake up early every morning, and I got to just do it. But I have that confidence. I know that the compounding interest will work.
I wish more people believe it in it, or I would even rephrase it. I wish more people just simply saw it as you describe it. Because I do agree with you. There is a certain level of simplicity to life and to jiu-jitsu. We just need to see it, and oftentimes we refuse. Not that we don't see it, we just refuse to see it. It's in front of us. We overcomplicate things.
I think it's scary.
Yeah, I agree. Ben, before we start wrapping this up, we've been at this for nearly an hour and a half. Before we start wrapping this up, where is your book available? Where can you be found? What's social media, websites? Let's plug this in, and I'll make sure that everything, there it is, right there.
So Lessons from the Mat is available on Amazon. It's all available in audiobook form in Audible. It's available in Apple Books. And I would tell you it's really first principles about what's helped me be successful in both my business and my life. And I would tell you there's simple things. There's no magic get rich quick scheme in here, but the reality is, I feel very confident that if you add some of these things to your life, it'll be beneficial.
And I will make sure the links to the book and to your site, your website, your social media is in the show notes of this episode. So if you guys are looking for that as easy access, right, click on that and I'll take you right in. And I encourage you guys to dig deep into some of those principles. I think they really, really could make things much easier and just simplify our life. Ben, thank you for being here for the last 90 minutes. Thank you for sharing the stories and really your philosophy. And again, I truly appreciate the simplicity as you're looking at life. I do believe that life is so complicated, or we make it complicated. And it could be so much easier. It could be so much simpler, including on the mat. I think we do overcomplicate jiu-jitsu.
I definitely believe that.
Yeah. Well, Ben, let's wrap this up for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your life story. And it was pleasure to chatting with you.
Thank you for
Likewise.
listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.